Part 1, Waking Up in Ancient Rome. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something raw, gritty, and gloriously uncomfortable life in ancient Rome. But not the glamorous, toga-draped, laurel-wearing emperor kind of life. No. Tonight you're not Caesar. You're not even close. You're just you. Dropped right into the beating, chaotic heart of the Roman Empire with no warning, no money, and no clue how to survive. So, before we dive into the sweat, sewage, and social rules that make modern traffic look polite, hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the ride we're about to take. And while you're at it, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? It's always wild seeing who's tuning in from around the world. Now, dim your lights, get cozy, or brace yourself, and let's take a walk through one very rough Roman day. Morning begins with misery. You open your eyes to yelling, not your alarm, not a morning bird real yelling. Someone arguing downstairs, a baby crying nearby, and chickens. Yes, actual chickens squawking in the hallway. Welcome to your new home, a Roman insula. Think ancient apartment building, but if it was built with hope dust and a complete disregard for fire safety. You live on the 3rd or 4th floor, which is ancient Rome's way of saying you're broke. The higher up you live, the more likely the floor gives out if someone above drops a pot of olive oil. Your room. It's a stone closet, literally. 4 cold, sweating walls. In summer, it's like being steamed alive. In winter, you freeze unless you're hugging a clay pot full of coals, if you're lucky enough to have one. You've got a straw mattress crawling with lice, and your blanket smells like wet wool and poor decisions. There's no furniture, no decor, and certainly no kitchen. You've got a chipped clay cup, a beat-up tunic, and if you're feeling fancy, maybe a wooden comb. That's it. Oh, and there's no toilet. Not in your room, not in your building. Just a chamber pot silently judging you in the corner. When it's full, you carry it down a staircase that's barely wide enough for your knees and smells like every terrible decision ever made by your neighbors. The walls are so thin you can hear everything. Prayers, coughs, late-night arguments, and very much not arguments. It's all public knowledge in here whether you like it or not. There's no privacy, no peace. Your first mission, find a bathroom. It's early, you're groggy, and your bladder is threatening to declare war. So, you head down the street chamber, pot in hand, modesty long gone. You're searching for the nearest Latrina Rome's version of a public restroom, and calling it a restroom is generous. It's more like a social mixer for people who don't believe in eye contact boundaries. What you find is a long, cold stone bench with holes cut into it. A trough runs underneath carrying water, just fast enough to keep the shame flowing. You sit if you're brave and hope the person next to you doesn't want to start a conversation. Because yes, people do talk here. Deals are made, gossip is swapped, and somewhere in the distance someone is probably arguing about grain prices while doing their business. There are no stalls, no privacy, and if you think that's the worst part, think again. Here comes the tersorium, a communal sponge on a stick. It sits in a bucket of vinegar or salt water, and yes, everyone uses it. In theory, you rinse it before and after use. In practice, that sponge has seen things you'll need therapy for. And when you're done, you rinse your hands in the nearest basin, no soap, of course. Just cold, slightly mysterious water, shared by everyone who came before you. The phrase "wash your hands in Rome" is more of a hopeful suggestion than actual hygiene. Breakfast of champions, or not. Congratulations, you've survived your first Roman bathroom experience. Now it's time for breakfast. which in ancient Rome is less about energy and more about basic survival. Meet the Ientaculum Rome's idea of a morning meal. You're getting stale bread and watered-down wine. That's it. No coffee, no eggs, no pancakes, and definitely no oat milk lattes. Breakfast is basically a formality, a way to remind yourself you're still alive. Barely. The bread. It's called panis rusticus, a chewy, grainy brick that tastes like despair and flour. It's dense, dry, and about as flavorful as the wall it was probably baked on. If you're lucky, maybe there's a smear of Garum Rome's infamous fermented fish sauce that smells like bad life choices and ocean regret. And yes, you're standing on the street tearing off chunks of this culinary punishment, while stray dogs circle and vendors scream about figs, fish guts, or both. If you have a coin or two, maybe you can score a fried chickpea cake. If not, well, chew slowly and try not to cry. And now, work. With a stomach full of regret and breadcrumbs, you begin the Roman workday. And trust me, unless you were born with a silver stylus, or you're related to someone important, your job is going to hurt. You might be a porter builder, street sweeper, or sewer worker. If you're especially lucky, you get to haul water for public baths, or carry bricks and sandals that feel like wet cardboard. The workday starts early, like before, sunrise early, and your boss isn't exactly offering motivational speeches. He's yelling, loud, in Latin. If you're late, you might get docked pay or just straight up flogged. There's no HR department in ancient Rome. There's just pain and possibly a sarcastic goat nearby. If you're a craftsman, life isn't much easier. You make clay pots. So, do 400 other guys on your street. Your competition will undercut your prices, steal your designs, and maybe punch you in the face at lunch. Even more respectable jobs like teaching or accounting aren't glamorous. If you're a teacher, you're trying to drill Latin grammar into the heads of rich kids who think they're already gods. If you're a messenger, you're sprinting across Rome's chaos with a scroll tucked under your arm and zero health insurance. Women work too spinning, weaving, selling veggies, running stalls, raising kids, and somehow surviving childbirth without medical training. Roman multitasking at its most brutal. And all this before lunch. Roman streets, the daily gauntlet. Let's say you've made it through half the day. Congrats. Now you just have to survive the streets. And I don't mean that figuratively. Ancient Rome streets are war zones dressed up as infrastructure. Sure, Roman roads are famous for being straight and expertly paved, but they're also open sewers. The middle of the road doubles as the city's main drainage system. So, if you step off the raised sidewalk and into the flow, congrats, you've baptized your foot in centuries of human waste. Traffic is wild. Wagons, carts, goats, people all crammed together in a honking, yelling, smelly free-for-all. There are no traffic lights, no rules. If you're in the way, you're probably getting run over by someone hauling amphorae full of garum while screaming at their donkey. And the smells. Let's just say Rome is aromatic. You're getting smoke from cooking fires, burning incense from temples, the stench of public toilets, and whatever that thing is rotting near the forum. There is no escape. You just walk through it and pray to Jupiter for a breeze. Aqueducts are cool until they aren't. Thirsty yet? You should be. Good news? Rome's aqueducts are incredible feats of engineering. Bad news, unless you're wealthy, that water might kill you. You can fill your jug at a public fountain, assuming you don't mind standing next to someone washing their feet or dunking their toddler. If you want to actually wash up, head to the Thermae, Rome's public baths. They're communal, often crowded, and have about as much modesty as a gladiator parade. The water. It's not clean. It's been through everyone, and I mean everyone. And guess what? Those elegant Roman pipes made of lead. That's right. You're scrubbing off street grime with heavy metal runoff and pretending the tingling sensation on your skin isn't a warning sign. And if you're feeling sick, you can always go see a doctor. Just kidding. We'll get into that disaster in the next section. Part 2. Pain medicine and dinner time in Rome. So, you've made it halfway through your day in the Roman Empire without getting trampled by a cart pickpocketed by a child or passing out from inhaling fish sauce fumes. Progress. But you're not in the clear yet, because the next challenge isn't outside, it's inside your body. Welcome to the wonderful world of Pain Roman style. Pain is the background music of ancient Rome. Let's say you stub your toe on a loose stone while walking past a temple. In our world, you'd slap on some ice, maybe pop a painkiller, and spend a few hours complaining about it on the couch. In ancient Rome, you grit your teeth, wrap it in a dirty rag, and limp like it's a personal insult from the gods. There's no Tylenol, no Advil, not even aloe vera, just hope and dirt. Break a bone, no cast, no sling. Just pray it heals straight or get ready for a lifetime of creative limping. Got a toothache? Good luck. You might find someone with pliers who once helped fix a chariot axle. That's your dentist now. Dental care in Rome is basically blacksmithing. Inside your mouth. Women, if you're pregnant, childbirth is a dice roll. The midwife might have herbs. She might also have a chant and a stick. There's no sterile equipment. There's no anesthesia. You scream, and if the gods like you, you live. If not, well, the apartment next door just opened up. Pain wasn't something Romans avoided. It was expected, embraced even. Stoicism. The philosophy that told people to endure suffering without whining was practically a personality trait. Cry about your dislocated shoulder. You're not just injured, you're weak. Pain builds character, and possibly scar tissue. Going to the doctor, or you might die faster. Alright, so maybe your injury is bad enough that you actually go see a medicus, a Roman doctor. Great idea, in theory, but let's set expectations. Roman medicine is kind of like trying to fix a car by licking the engine and guessing based on flavor. Their understanding of the human body revolved around the 4 humors: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you were sick, the idea was that one of those was out of whack. The solution, balance it. And how do you balance it? You drain something. You walk into your local healer with a sore throat, and the first thing they want to do is cut you open and drain your blood. Because of course the answer to being weak is making you weaker. Got a fever. Let's remove a pint and see what happens. Depressed. We'll drain your sadness bile, have a rash. Slap on some crushed beetles and goat dung. Now, to be fair, some treatments worked, but often by accident. They'd wash wounds with vinegar or wine, which actually did help kill bacteria. But they'd also do things like mix honey with burnt ash and apply it to infections, which was either going to cure you or curse you. And surgery. Oh yeah, Romans had tools, scalpels, forceps, even drills, but no anesthetics. You stayed wide awake while they sliced into your leg or pulled a rotten tooth. You screamed into a piece of wood and hoped they didn't sneeze mid-incision. Sterilization. Not a thing. A clean toga was probably their version of hygiene. So, yeah, the doctor might save your life, but odds are they'll just make you bleed in new ways. Dinner time. What's in the bowl? Probably regret. Let's say you survived your medical visit. It's evening now and you're starving. Time for cena, the Roman dinner. Now if you're imagining pasta pizza or even a halfway decent soup stop, those things don't exist yet. No tomatoes, no potatoes, no noodles. Definitely no tiramisu. This isn't Italy. This is pre-it Italy. If you're rich, dinner might involve flamingo tongues, jellyfish and vinegar, or stuffed dormice, all served with a side of "look how wealthy I am." If you're not rich and you get pulse. That's a grainy porridge made of spelt beans or lentils. It tastes like someone boiled cardboard and stirred in sadness. If you're lucky, it's warm. If not, it's just damp and gray. Protein maybe, if someone caught a fish or trapped a rat that didn't look too diseased. Otherwise, it's salted cheese olives and that same garum fish sauce that's haunted your nose all day. And wine, yes, but always diluted. Drinking straight wine in Rome was seen as barbaric. But guess what? The water they dilute it with isn't exactly bottled spring stuff. So, basically you're choosing between full-strength plague juice and slightly boozy swamp water. The Roman dining experience, buy on. Bring your own napkin. You sit cross-legged or lean on your elbow at a wooden table or stone bench sharing your sad little meal with others. No forks, maybe a spoon, probably just your hands. And when you're done, no napkins. You wipe your hands on your tunic or on the communal cloth. That's never been washed. By the end of it, your stomach is full-ish, but you're still hungry. You've had bread wine, maybe a lentil, and now you're buzzing just enough from the alcohol to think, maybe tomorrow will be better. It won't be, but that little lie helps you get through the night. Let's talk Roman entertainment. Horror as a hobby. All right, you've survived work dinner and that weird fermented burp from your neighbor. Time to relax, right? In Rome, relaxation means violence. Let's start with a Colosseum, the main attraction. A glorious stone theater where tens of thousands would gather to watch. People die. Gladiators fought animals. Criminals got torn apart. And sometimes if the emperor was feeling spicy, they'd flood the whole place and reenact naval battles, with real ships and real drowning. Entry was free because the empire wanted you distracted while the Senate was quietly raising taxes. And let's be honest, it worked. You sat next to sweaty strangers, watched a guy get disemboweled and clapped because everyone else was clapping. Peer pressure is timeless. Not into blood sports. The theater's an option, but don't expect Shakespeare. Roman comedies were like ancient sitcoms with poop jokes. The tragedies, everyone dies, even the musicians. Maybe you prefer something fast. Head to the Circus Maximus for chariot races. No seat belts, no brakes, just speed crashes and the occasional horse flying into the crowd. The crowd loves it. Bets are made. Beer or bad wine is spilled. And if you cheer for the wrong team, congratulations, you're now in a fistfight with a man named Gaius, who smells like onions and bloodlust. Street shows and sidewalk chaos. Too broke for the Colosseum. Don't worry, entertainment comes to you. Rome's streets are buzzing at night. Fire breathers, jugglers, acrobats, con artists, and possibly a drunk philosopher screaming about virtue. It's chaotic, it's loud, it's dangerous, but it's also the only break from reality you're getting. Just watch your purse, and maybe don't follow the guy offering mystery figs for cheap. Justice in Rome, bring a bribe, not a lawyer. Now, before we wrap up the night, let's talk about the one thing that might still crush your soul before bed, Roman justice. If you think Roman law is there to protect you, you've clearly never been poor in a toga. First off, citizenship matters. If you're a full Roman citizen, you have rights. Sort of. If someone important is annoyed with you, those rights evaporate faster than your chamber pot in summer. Not a citizen oof. You're basically walking property. If you're enslaved and your master dies under suspicious circumstances, the law might execute all the slave in the household. Not kidding. Trials. Less courtroom drama, more theatrical performance. The wealthy show up with witnesses, scrolls, dramatic speeches. You show up with a tunic and a headache. Punishments. Brutal. Thieves might lose a hand. Liars might get their tongue pierced. Fraudsters flogged in public. And if you're dumb enough to insult the emperor, it's execution. But make it flamboyant, crucifixion burning, maybe being eaten by something large and angry. Law enforcement. That's the Vigiles Rome's version of police and firefighters. They're underpaid, undertrained, and easily bribed. If you get robbed, they shrug. If you bribe them, they help you rob someone else. So, how's that Roman life treating you? By now your feet hurt, your head is spinning, and you've definitely inhaled something toxic. You're tired, hungry, possibly bleeding, and very aware that your entire life hangs on the whim of a senator, a slave owner, or a slightly grumpy temple priest. And guess what? The sun's barely down. But don't worry, we've still got one last horror show to cover nightfall in ancient Rome, where things somehow manage to get worse. Fires, thieves, screams, and sleeplessness await. Part 3. Rome after dark fires, thieves and fortune. All right, the sun is setting. You've worked, you've suffered, you've eaten something that probably wasn't fully dead when you bought it. Maybe you're thinking, surely now I get to lie down, rest, maybe dream about clean water and soft pillows. Oh, sweet summer child. Because in ancient Rome, night isn't when the city calms down. It's when things get worse. The noise doesn't fade. The chaos doesn't sleep. The predators just switch shifts. Nightfall in the Insula 1, match away from disaster. Let's start with your home, the Insula. Remember that poorly built multi-story Roman apartment made of wood, flammable hopes, and unspoken curses. Yeah, it's a fire hazard with stairs. Cooking after dark is illegal, not because Romans cared about your safety, but because they didn't want the entire neighborhood to go up in smoke. Still, people get hungry. People light lamps. People knock over oil jars. And suddenly, boom, the whole block becomes a bonfire. If a fire breaks out, who you gonna call? The Vigiles Rome's version of firefighters. But these guys aren't rolling up with shiny red water trucks. They show up with buckets, maybe a ladder, and a look that says, yeah, we're probably gonna lose this one. They're underpaid, often undertrained, and in most cases more likely to save rich people's homes than yours. No alarms, no 911, just neighbors screaming and someone trying to smother the flames with a tunic soaked in wine. And if you survive, congratulations. You've just lost your mattress, your clay cup, and the one blanket that still kinda smelled like your childhood. But hey, at least you're not dead. Yet, street crime, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Okay, so maybe you didn't die in a fire. You decide to go for a walk. Or maybe you're coming home late from a public bath or night market. Welcome to Rome after dark, where the streets are pitch black unless you can afford a torch. And even then, that torch just tells muggers where to find you. There are no streetlights, no lanterns, no police patrols in shining armor. It's just moonlight memory and your best guess of where the pothole is. Thieves, pickpockets, drunk soldiers, runaway gladiators. This is their time. They're lurking in the alleys, crouching behind columns, waiting around corners with a wine jug and a smile that says, "Nice sandals." Shame if something happened to them. And the vigils. Again, they're supposed to patrol the city. But most of them are asleep drunk or just pretending not to see things unless you've slipped them a coin. So if you hear footsteps behind you in the dark, don't expect help. Run. Or better yet, don't go out at all. Which brings us to another problem. Trying to sleep in the eternal city. So, you've made it home. Your building didn't burn. You weren't mugged. It's late. You lie down on your straw mattress, which is crunchy. You wrap yourself in your damp wool blanket and think, now I'll sleep. Ha ha! No. Because Rome at night is loud. First there's your neighbor. He's coughing like he's auditioning for a tragic play. Someone in the next room is either fighting or passionately making up. Hard to tell. A drunk man is yelling about mercury outside your window. Dogs are barking, cats are hissing. Chickens for some reason are arguing with a goat. And then the processions start. That's right, religious processions even in the dead of night. Priests and followers walking through the streets banging drums, lighting incense and chanting in honor of gods whose names you forgot in Latin class. Sometimes they're celebrating. Sometimes they're warding off plagues. Sometimes, who even knows anymore? And if a senator's mistress had a bad day, you're going to hear it, through stone walls, with bonus chair throwing sound effects. Eventually, sometime around 3 a.m., maybe you drift off. But even then you sleep with one eye open because rats are a thing. Big ones. And if you're on the top floor, part of the ceiling might decide tonight's the night it wants to retire. Survive the night. Repeat the cycle. The sun rises again. You wake up sore, sweaty, and probably more tired than when you went to bed. But you made it. One whole day. One whole Roman night. And now, it's time to do it all again. Check the fire, empty the chamber pot, eat the bread, avoid the chariots, work until your hands bleed, cheer as a gladiator loses an eye, bathe in shared bacteria, dodge a thief, fear a fire, and fall asleep praying the ceiling stays put. But hey, Rome is eternal. At least that's what they say. Religion isn't comfort. It's a checklist of fear. Maybe you're hoping religion will offer some kind of peace. After all, you're surrounded by temples. Gods are everywhere. Statues, shrines, offerings. Maybe you'll find a little meaning in the madness. Let me stop you right there. Religion in Rome is not about comfort. It's about obligation. There are gods for everything. Jupiter, sky, Mars, war, Venus, love, but also gods for door hinges, boundaries, sewers, and even mildew. Yes, mildew has a deity. His name is Robigus, and you better respect him unless you want your walls to rot. If you don't honor the right gods at the right time, in the right way, bad things happen. Not necessarily to you either. Sometimes your whole street suffers because you forgot to light a candle for the goddess of grain. That's right, forgot to thank Ceres during planting season boom drought. Skip your offering to Terminus, the god of boundaries. Suddenly your neighbor thinks he owns your wall. Religion here is like a giant invisible to-do list. And if you miss a step, the consequences are cosmic. Worship the emperor or else. And on top of all the other gods, there's one more you'd better not forget: the emperor. He's not just a political leader, he's a living god. You are expected, no required, to burn incense, sing praises, and absolutely not roll your eyes when his statue goes by on a cart pulled by perfumed oxen. Skip out on emperor worship. People notice, and suddenly you're getting side-eye in the market. Maybe a whisper at the bathhouse. And if it gets back to the wrong person, you're not just rude, you're a traitor. Want to succeed, get a patron, and pray. Let's say you want to get ahead. You're tired of being poor. You don't want to die in the same insula you were born in. Can you rise? Yes, but only if you play the social game. In Rome, you need a patron. Someone richer, more powerful, who agrees to help you in exchange for your loyalty, flattery, and constant favors. Think of it as a cross between a boss, a landlord, and a mafia don. Each morning, you wake up, put on your best tunic, and go to their house for the salutatio, a ritual morning greeting. You wait in line with a bunch of other poor hopefuls, compliment their new sandals, laugh at their son's dumb joke. Then ask for a job, a coin, or a recommendation. If you're lucky, they toss you a few sea sturces and let you walk beside their litter in public like a well-dressed pet. Congratulations, you're now socially visible. But don't get too bold. Ambition makes people nervous. Rise too fast, and rivals will take you down. Rome is a ladder smeared with oil and lined with knives. Everyone wants to climb. Everyone wants you to fall. Marriage, that's politics with extra drapery. And if you're hoping for love, pause that romantic fantasy. Marriage in Rome isn't about feelings. It's about alliances. Families marry to secure land, political favor, or better access to grain shipments. Falling in love with the wrong person isn't just embarrassing, it's a career-ending move. Marry well or get cut out of your family's will. Love is for poets, and poets are broke. So, how are you feeling about Rome now? You've been stabbed by splinters, gagged by fish sauce, nearly trampled by carts, shamed by a communal sponge, and judged by gods you don't understand. You've cheered for executions, bribed your way out of street crime, dodged religious festivals, and begged a patron for 3 coins and a crumb of dignity. And it's only been one day. Part 4. Rhodogon the princess who wore war in her hair. Okay, you've survived ancient Rome. Barely. You've limped through latrines dined on despair and dodged nighttime firestorms. But now we're leaving the eternal city behind. We're traveling east, past deserts, through the shadows of mountains, into a world just as ancient, just as dangerous, and far less forgiving. Welcome to Parthia, a powerful empire locked in a constant game of political chess with Rome. This isn't your typical kingdom of palaces and perfume banquets. It's a place where loyalty is fickle rebellions fester behind city walls, and sometimes, just sometimes, the person best suited to crush a rebellion isn't a prince or a general. It's a princess. Meet Rhodogon. Not a name you hear often in history class, but once you know it, you won't forget it. Royal blood, iron spine. Rhodogon wasn't born into peace. She was born into war. Her father, or possibly her older brother, depending on which scribe you ask, was Mithridates II, the man who took Parthia from a dusty kingdom to a sprawling empire. But empires come with problems, rebellions, betrayals, and neighbors who don't understand the word conquered. Rhodogon. She didn't grow up learning embroidery and tea-pouring etiquette. She grew up watching war maps, hearing ambassadors argue, and learning which cities could be trusted this week. She wasn't trained to be a symbol. She was trained to be a weapon. The rebellion that asked for trouble. At some point, likely during a transition of power or a strategic lull, a rebellion broke out in the western provinces. Think places like Media or Babylonia, areas that were rich, semi-loyal, and always ready to test authority. The rebels weren't just villagers with pitchforks. These were aristocrats, city governors, and warlords who decided they didn't feel like paying taxes anymore. Or worse, that Parthia was too weak to stop them. Usually the empire would send a general, or a cousin, or someone with a shiny helmet and way too much pride. But not this time. This time, Rhodogon stepped forward, and she didn't just approve the battle plans from a comfortable palace. She took command, the vow that made her a legend. Before she rode out, Rhodogon made a public vow. She swore that she would not wash, comb, or tend to her hair until the rebellion was crushed. At first it sounds dramatic, maybe even theatrical. But in Parthian culture, where appearance carried social power and feminine identity was tied to elegance and control, this was a radical move. She was declaring in front of soldiers and nobles alike, "My vanity ends where your loyalty begins." She didn't need gold. She didn't need silk. She needed dust, grit, a horse, and a cause. the dirty banner of determination. And so Radagon rode out. No parades, no pedals, just cavalry armor and war. The campaign wasn't quick. The rebels were dug in, fortified, and confident. They weren't expecting a wild-haired princess with a glint in her eyes and a sword on her hip. Radagon used Parthian tactics, mobile cavalry, feigned retreats, hit-and-run raids. Her forces were everywhere and nowhere. They struck cities at night, disappeared into the desert, then returned 2 days later from the opposite direction. As the war dragged on, her hair began to change. What started as a clean braid turned into knotted ropes, matted with sweat and battlefield dust. It became a symbol, a living flag of resistance. Her soldiers saw it and whispered, "We're still fighting." The enemy saw it and wondered, what kind of woman rides into war looking like vengeance itself? The Witch Queen of Parthia, the rebels started calling her the Witch Queen. Not because she used spells, but because she refused to act like a royal woman. And that scared them more than a dozen armored battalions. She didn't sit in the back. She didn't sleep in comfort. She ate with her troops, patrolled with them, reviewed weapons, took wounds, bled beside them. By month 3, she wasn't just a commander. She was a myth in the making. The final stronghold, where patience became a weapon. Eventually, the rebels retreated into a final stronghold, a city said to be impenetrable. They thought they could outlast her, that she'd get tired, that her empire would recall her, that maybe she'd break her vow out of boredom. Spoiler, they were wrong. Radagon didn't attack immediately. She laid siege, cut off food, intercepted messages, poisoned wells. The city didn't fall by force. It rotted from within. Her camp sat just outside her wild hair, visible every day as a reminder. You're still surrounded. I'm still here. And then one night, a gate was left unguarded. Some say it was fatigue. Others claim it was treason. Either way, Radagon's soldiers slipped in, opened the main gates, and the city fell before sunrise. Victory wasn't trumpets, it was water. Most rulers would throw a victory parade. Light incense, claim glory. Radagon, she asked for water. In a public courtyard, before her entire army, she washed her hair for the first time since the campaign began. Servants brought warm water, oils, combs, and in front of hundreds of battle-hardened men, she began to untangle months of war from her scalp. It wasn't vanity, it was symbolism. Every knot she combed free a city reclaimed. Every rinse of water, a rebellion drowned. Soldiers stood silent, not out of protocol, but out of reverence. Some say she laughed, others say she cried. Either way, no one forgot it, because in that moment, she wasn't just a princess. She was a living legend. She didn't return in triumph, she returned in duty. She could have gone back to court in glory, let the scribes write poems, let nobles faint from admiration. But she didn't. Instead, she visited each city she'd reclaimed, one by one. She walked the streets, checked defenses, spoke to citizens, asked about food stores and border security. She wasn't showing off. She was doing the job. And the people, they didn't gather to worship a royal. They gathered because they knew she cared. Not from speeches, but from scars. Powerful, respected, and problematic. By the time she returned to court, her story had spread like wildfire. And now the elites had a problem. What do you do with a woman who led armies and won? Some suggested she be married off as if a husband would contain her. Others whispered she should be put in charge of distant borders, keep her influence far from the capital. Radagon, she said nothing. She didn't boast. She didn't lobby. She waited, because she understood the war may have ended on the battlefield. But power games were just beginning, and sometimes the most dangerous move is the one you don't make. Part 5. Radagon. When history tried to erase her, the dust didn't. So, Radagon returned from war, not with a crown on her head, but with the Empire in her shadow. She had crushed a rebellion-led troops through dust and blood, and washed her vow away in front of men who would have died for her. And now she was back not as a royal heir or a courtly accessory, but as a force. A woman with the loyalty of armies and the respect of the provinces. And that terrified people. The palace didn't know what to do with her. Radagon walked the marble halls of Parthia like a sword in a silk sheath. Not loud, not demanding, just present. And her presence said everything. Every time she stepped into a room, conversations paused. Ministers cleared their throats. Generals adjusted their belts. Because here was a woman who didn't talk about power. She had, it earned it, and wore it like the dust in her hair unapologetically. No jewels, no throne, no fanfare. Just proof. Proof that she didn't need permission to lead. Proof that she could take cities the way others took breakfast. And the court didn't like that. Because power in Parthia was supposed to flow through title, not legends. Through marriage, not military vows. Through men. But Radagon had thrown out that rulebook the day she refused to comb her hair. And now, the only question was, what do you do with a woman you can't control? She chose silence as a strategy. You might think Radagon fought to keep her position. That she demanded land armies or influence. But she didn't. She did something far more dangerous. She waited. No press tours, no loud declarations, no ego. She simply showed up to council meetings, to temple festivals, to military reviews. She nodded, listened, smiled sometimes, and said very little. But every time a new policy was proposed, eyes glanced in her direction. Every time a general boasted about a border skirmish, he paused if she raised an eyebrow. Her silence wasn't absence. It was presence as pressure. She had become a living warning. I don't need your approval to matter. I've already mattered. And that unnerved everyone. The problem with power that doesn't beg. You see, empires are good at managing predictable power. They can elevate a king assigned a general, celebrate a marriage alliance. But they have no idea what to do with a woman who doesn't ask and doesn't leave. Radagon wasn't trying to start a coup. She wasn't stirring rebellion. She was just there, watching, remembered, and memory. That's a powerful, inconvenient thing. Because as long as she existed, the people had a standard, a living proof that authority didn't need to be inherited, it could be earned. And empires. They don't like standards they didn't create. And so, the quiet erasure began. No one dared confront her. No one exiled her. No one assassinated her in a dramatic act of political theater. They just stopped writing her name down. Scribes forgot to record her in royal annals. Chroniclers skipped her chapter in the family lineage. When state poets wrote about the rebellion, they shifted credit to a generic male commander. The washing of the hair never officially happened. The siege she led labeled a group effort. Bit by bit, they edited her out. Not because she failed, but because she succeeded without their permission. And history, as we all know, is written by those with the pen. But here's the thing. The dust remembered. Her legend outran the record books. The cities she saved still spoke her name. The soldiers she fought beside whispered her story like prayer. In taverns around fires and barracks and villages, people didn't talk about her as a royal. They talked about her like a myth that refused to die. She became a cautionary tale for men who underestimated grit, and an anthem for women who were told to wait their turn. No statue was raised, no epic poem commissioned, but she was remembered anyway, because you can't bury what's already in the soil. Her image lived in memory, not marble. The people didn't need a monument, they had the moment. That courtyard where the basin filled, where the dust fell. wear silence wrapped around her like a crown. That was her coronation, not in gold but in grit. And in that moment, she did something no emperor could. She became a standard, not just for victory, but for integrity, for sacrifice, for vows kept until the scalp bled and the cities surrendered. The legacy that refused to be edited. Years passed, decades. Maybe Rhodogon died peacefully in a quiet estate. Maybe she disappeared into the provinces, mentoring a new generation of women who would never be written down. Maybe, as some like to believe, she rode again one last time into the mountains to put down another rebellion and vanish from history. Sword still sharp, vow still etched in her hair. No one knows, but centuries later, her name kept surfacing. In stories, in songs, in legends where women rode through dust storms, hair unwashed, eyes burning, and enemies trembling. Because Rhodogon became more than a woman. She became a template, a message, a prophecy disguised as a memory. When a woman keeps a vow, the world pays attention. They say vows are only as strong as the will behind them. Rhodogon's vow wasn't written in ink or carved into stone. It was tangled into her hair, soaked in sweat, and bound to the fate of a nation. And when that vow was fulfilled, she didn't need applause. She had already outlived it. She had already become something bigger than herself. Part 6. Tomyris the Queen, who defeated an empire and bathed a king in blood. You've heard of Cyrus the Great, right? Founder of the Achaemenid Empire, master of strategy, conqueror of Babylon, a man so revered that even his enemies wrote about him with respect. When most kings were carving their legacies into stone, Cyrus was carving empires out of entire continents. But this isn't his story. This is the story of the woman who ended his reign. Her name was Tomyris. And while you won't find her face etched on coins or her name inscribed in Greek stone, what she did left a stain on history no empire could wash away. Because when Cyrus tried to outsmart her, she didn't just win, she destroyed him. Welcome to the steppes home of the Massage Tay. Let's set the stage. This isn't Persia. This isn't Rome. This is the Central Asian steppes, wide, wind-blasted, endless grasslands, where horses are faster than messages and warriors are born in the saddle. Tomyris ruled over the Massage Tay, a nomadic confederation of tribes east of the Caspian Sea. They didn't have marble temples or golden thrones. They had mobility archery and a deep distrust of kings who wore too much jewelry. And yet here was Cyrus marching toward them, with the largest empire the world had ever seen, at the time expecting yet another swift victory. Spoiler, he miscalculated, badly. Cyrus offers a marriage proposal, and gets laughed out of the steppe. Before the fighting ever began, Cyrus tried to play the oldest card in the book marriage. He sent envoys to Tomyris, proposing a union. Sounds noble, right? But it wasn't love he was after. It was land. By marrying her, he hoped to absorb the Massage Tay territory into his empire, bloodlessly, diplomatically, and quietly. Tomyris, she saw right through it. She sent back word essentially saying, "I know your game, and I don't play checkers when I live on a battlefield." No alliance, no submission. She wasn't going to be someone's trophy queen. She was already a ruler, and Cyrus, he didn't like being told no. The trap that killed her son. So like any scorned empire builder, Cyrus turned to deception. He set a trap. Cyrus built an empty camp, filled it with wine delicacies and just enough valuables to make it look like a careless military outpost. Then he left it for the Massage Tay to find. And they did. Tomyris' son, Spargapises, led the raiding party. They attacked, found the camp empty, and celebrated. They drank the wine which they weren't used to, and when they were too drunk to stand, Cyrus's forces sprang the trap. slaughtered most of them, took Spargapieses alive. When he sobered up and realized he'd been captured in a drunken haze, he asked to be released and then killed himself in shame. Cyrus expected Tomyris to be crushed. Instead, he unleashed something far worse. Tomyris sends a message, and it's not a peace offer. When Tomyris got the news, she didn't collapse in mourning. She didn't retreat. She didn't write a speech. She wrote a warning. She sent a message to Cyrus that basically said, "You may be king of a great empire, but you're also a coward who traps his enemies with wine instead of facing them in battle. Return my son, or I swear by the sun, I will give you all the blood you thirst for." Cyrus didn't return the body. So Tomyris prepared for war. And this time, there were no traps. Just two armies, on an open field, with no lies between them. The battle that shook an empire. The exact date and location are lost to time. But what we do know is this. Tomyris marshaled her full army warriors on horseback archers, foot soldiers, every last trained fighter her people could spare. And Cyrus, he brought the might of Persia, iron organization numbers. But here's the thing about empire soldiers. They fight in formations. They follow orders. The Massageite. They fight like wind. And that day the wind turned red. The battle was brutal. Not just a clash, a massacre. Cyrus fought to the death, maybe believing he could still turn the tide. But by sunset he was dead. Not captured, dead. And Tomyris, she found his body. And what she did next, that's what turned her from a queen into a legend. The bowl of blood. According to the historian Herodotus, Tomyris took Cyrus's body, beheaded him, and then filled a skin bag or basin with blood. Then in front of her generals and gods, she placed his head into the bowl and said, "Drink your fill of blood, you bloodthirsty man." Was it symbolic? Was it literal? Does it matter? Because that image, a king's head in a bowl of blood, presented by a woman he underestimated, that's what lived on. Not his victories, his defeat. At the hands of a queen, no one thought would dare stand against him. After victory, she didn't build a temple, she went home. Tomyris didn't take over Persia. She didn't loot palaces or declare herself empress. She returned to the steppe, back to the plains, the horses, and the people who raised her. No parades, no monuments. Because Tomyris didn't fight for power. She fought for justice, for her son, for her people. And once that was done, she didn't need to keep fighting. That was the difference. Legacy carved in legend, not stone. To this day, we don't know where Tomyris is buried. There are no statues of her in golden halls, but her name shows up quietly, stubbornly across time, in the whispers of historians, in the poetry of Central Asian nomads, in the silence of every battlefield where a woman chose to lead instead of plead. And Cyrus, he built an empire, but she ended it. You see, history loves conquerors, but it remembers those who conquer conquerors. Tomyris didn't write scrolls. She didn't need to. She wrote her story in blood across the bodies of men who thought her weaker. She carved it into the spine of every general who forgot that grief makes fire out of bone. Pierce the 7. Dihya, the last flame of North Africa. We've marched through Rome. We've bled beside Rhodogon. We've watched Tomyris place a king's head in a bowl of blood. And now we journey again to a land where deserts breathe fire, mountains cut the sky, and freedom was never given, only fought for. This is North Africa. And this is the story of Dihya, also known as Kahina, though she probably never called herself that. A Berber queen, a prophetess to her people, a war chief to her enemies, and the woman who stood between Islamic expansion and the last heartbeat of an ancient land, not as an obstacle, but as a wall of fire. When the caliphate came west, By the 7th century, the Umayyad Caliphate had swept across the Middle East and into Africa like a storm. Egypt had fallen, Libya was under control. The sands trembled with the sound of armies chanting the name of Allah and waving the green banners of Islam. But west of Tunisia, past the Atlas Mountains, was a people they couldn't quite conquer, the Berbers. Not because the Berbers had cities or wealth like Alexandria, but because they had something else. Mountains, terrain, pride, memory, and Dihya. She wasn't born a queen. She became one by force. Dihya wasn't born with a crown. She didn't inherit a throne. She took power the only way that mattered to her people, by proving she could lead. She came from the Ores Mountains, jagged, brutal, beautiful. A place where the wind carves stone, and men are shaped by hunger and heat. She was Berber, a people with dozens of tribes, dialects, and long-standing rivalries. But when the Caliphate's generals began sending messengers west, demanding conversion allegiance taxes, the tribes didn't know what to do. Except Dihya. She united them. Not with fear, with fire. The woman they called Kahina. Her enemies called her Kahina, meaning sorceress or seer, a title meant to discredit her as mystical, irrational, dangerous. But among her own people, she was wise, tactical, and ruthless when needed. She saw what was coming, the slow erosion of freedom, the loss of identity, the trade of ancestral land for foreign religion, and she wasn't going to let it happen. So, she didn't wait for the Caliphate to knock. She struck first. The mountains breathe war. She led a surprise attack on advancing Umayyad forces near the edge of the mountain passes. And they didn't see her coming, because no one expected an organized resistance from fragmented mountain tribes, let alone one led by a woman. Her troops ambushed, burned supply lines, harassed scouts, and melted into the hills before retaliation could even form. She used terrain like a blade. She used memory like armor. And by the time the dust settled, the invaders were gone. For a moment, North Africa was hers. She didn't just defend, she burned it all down. But Dihya knew something tragic. Victories are temporary. If she simply fought back, the invaders would return. Stronger, wiser, more prepared. So she made a choice that still sparks debate to this day. She began a scorched earth campaign. She ordered the destruction of cities, farms, irrigation systems, anything that might tempt or supply a foreign army. To deny the land to the enemy. She denied it to herself. It was brutal, and her own people questioned it. But Dihya wasn't trying to win a war. She was trying to delay the inevitable, to hold the line long enough for something else to rise. And for a while, it worked. But empires always come back. Eventually, the Umayyads returned, this time with a larger force, better intelligence, and a secret weapon, diplomacy. They offered alliances. They promised freedom under Islam. They converted some of her former allies. And soon, Dihya stood alone. The final battle. She knew it was over before the sun even rose that morning. But she didn't retreat. She gathered the last of her loyal fighters and met the army on open ground. Some say the battle lasted a day. Others say it was over before noon. Either way, she fell, sword in hand. No surrender, no capture. Just death on her terms. They buried her in the dirt of the land she had tried to save. And the Caliphate moved on. But you can't conquer what you never understood. Yes, Dihya died. Yes, the Berbers were absorbed into the expanding empire. Yes, her name was rewritten, retranslated, distorted. Some said she was Jewish. Others said Christian. Some even claimed she was a witch, a devil, a demoness. But all of that was noise. The truth, she was Berber, a leader, a flame, not meant to last forever, only to burn long enough to light something behind her. She wasn't trying to live forever, just to be remembered. And she was, in the mountains, in oral stories, in desert songs passed from grandmother to granddaughter. The woman who refused when everyone else bowed. The woman who told an empire, "You may take the land, but you'll never take the spirit." Every empire meets a Dihya, eventually. Rome had Boudica, Persia had Tamiris. The Umayyads, they had Dihya, because every unstoppable force eventually meets an immovable woman. And even when they lose, they win. Not in life, but in legacy. Part 8. Lagertha the Shield Maiden, who fought like fate itself. We've marched through the ruins of Rome, spilled royal blood in the steppes, and watched flames rise over North Africa. Now we sail north, to lands where the seas foam white, the air smells like pine and blood, and the sound of a long ship means either salvation or slaughter. This is Scandinavia, and the woman we meet here, she is not a queen in a throne room. She is not a prophetess cloaked in incense. She is a shield maiden forged in war, named in sagas, and remembered as one of the fiercest warriors the North ever knew. Her name is Lagertha, and even in the world of gods and monsters, she was real enough to terrify both. A woman of saga, but not fiction. Now, before we go further, let's clear something up. Some historians argue Lagertha may be legend, a composite figure from Norse myth. Others believe she was absolutely real, a war leader whose story was later mythologized. But here's the thing. Her deeds were too precise to be pure myth, and too wild to be just history. She was first recorded by Saxo Grammaticus, a Danish historian writing in the 12th century, and even he didn't quite know how to categorize her. Because Lagertha didn't fit in boxes, she broke them with an axe. Enter Ragnar Lothbrok and the woman who saved his life. You've probably heard of Ragnar Lothbrok, the Viking king, the dragon slayer, the husband of legends. Well, when Ragnar was young, he went to war against the king of Sweden, who had humiliated his family. During this campaign, he encountered a group of warriors so fierce, so unexpected, that even seasoned berserkers stopped to stare. These warriors were women, shield maidens, and leading them wearing armor over her fury was Lagertha. She didn't come as decoration. She came with steel and strategy. And during the battle, when Ragnar's men faltered, it was Lagertha who charged. The enemy turned the tide and saved the day. Ragnar was so impressed, he did what any Viking legend would do. He proposed, the courtship that nearly killed him. But Lagertha wasn't a woman to be wooed with praise and poems. Nope, she tested him. When Ragnar arrived at her home to ask for her hand, she set a bear and a huge dog to guard the entrance. Yes, a bear. Most suitors would have turned around. Ragnar, he killed the bear and strangled the dog. Romantic in the Viking sense. And so Lagertha agreed to marry him. But make no mistake, she wasn't some passive bride. She was his equal. In combat, in leadership, in reputation. For a while they ruled together partners in blood and conquest. Then she left, because she could. Eventually Ragnar left Lagertha to marry another for politics for land, or maybe just out of ambition. Whatever the reason, she didn't crumble. She returned to her lands in Norway, took command of her own forces, and lived as an independent warlord. Years passed, but when Ragnar found himself in trouble again facing enemies he couldn't defeat, who do you think came to his rescue? Lagertha. She sailed across seas with 120 ships' reinforcements and fire in her eyes. She didn't forget betrayal, but she didn't let it stop her from winning. And together, they crushed his enemies once more. After the battle, Ragnar admitted something historians still quote. She fought like a man with the heart of a lion. But she wasn't fighting like a man. She was fighting like Lagertha, a death that wasn't quiet. We don't know exactly how Lagertha died, Some say she was murdered by a jealous rival. Some say she fell in battle. Others say she died an old woman buried near the sea where the waves still remember her name. But in Viking belief, it didn't matter how you died. What mattered was how you lived. And Lagertha lived like a flame inside a storm. Uncontrollable. Brilliant. Unforgettable. Lagertha wasn't an exception. She was a reminder. You see, Norse society wasn't kind. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't gentle, but it made room begrudgingly for strength. And sometimes that strength came with braided hair and a blade. Lagertha wasn't the only shield maiden, but she was the one who proved that glory doesn't care about gender. Only grit, only courage, only victory. She didn't need to be immortal. She needed to be heard. The sagas remember her. The stones whisper her name. And every time someone tells a story about a woman who fights without asking for permission, Lagertha rides again. Across fields of frost, over waves of war, in hearts that still carry the rhythm of distant drums. Part 9, Joan of Arc. The girl who burned brighter than kings. We've seen warriors born from vengeance, queens who carried fire in their bones, and shield maidens who refused to kneel. But now we enter a different kind of battlefield. This time it's not the steppes or the desert or the sea. It's France. It's medieval Europe torn apart by war politics and religious paranoia. And the next woman we meet, she had no title, no army, no training. She couldn't read or write. And yet, at just 17 years old, she became the voice of a kingdom, the terror of an empire, and the saint whose body lit the sky on fire. Her name is Jeanne d'Arc, but you know her as Joan of Arc. Born in dirt, called by heaven. Joan was born in 1412 in the tiny village of Domremy in northeastern France. She was a peasant. Just another girl in a world where peasant girls mattered only for marriage labor or silence. She wasn't educated. She wasn't rich. She wasn't remarkable. Until she was. Because at the age of 13, Joan began hearing voices. Not whispers, not madness. Voices that claimed to be Saints Michael, Catherine, Margaret, telling her she was chosen. Chosen to do what? Save France. Imagine it. You're 13. You've never seen a battlefield. You've never held a sword. And a voice tells you, lead an army, crown a king, change the fate of your country. Most people would have dismissed it. Joan listened. The 100 Years' War. A land drowning in blood. Let's talk about the world she stepped into. France was in chaos, ripped apart by the 100 Years' War with England. Half the country was occupied. The French throne was in dispute. The English supported a rival heir. The legitimate King Charles VII was hiding in the Loire Valley, barely holding on. And into this hell walked a teenage girl in a homespun dress saying, God sent me to deliver France. You can imagine how well that went. At first they laughed. Then they listened. The girl in armor. Joan eventually made her way to the royal court, not by noble blood, but by conviction. She demanded to speak to Charles. She passed multiple theological tests. She predicted things no one could have known. And in a moment that changed history, she convinced a desperate king to give her an army. Yes, a 17-year-old girl, no military experience, no noble name, was handed troops armor, a banner, and a mission. To lift the siege of Orleans, one of the last strongholds in loyalist hands. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly what she did. Joan didn't fight, she led. Let's be clear. Joan wasn't a sword-swinging Valkyrie. She carried a banner, not a weapon. She wore white armor, symbolizing purity and divine purpose. She didn't stand at the back. She led charges. She took an arrow to the shoulder, pulled it out, and went back to shouting commands. She didn't kill, but she inspired men to die for her. Not because she was a myth, because she was real. A girl who believed fully that God walked with her and made others believe it too. She crowned a king. After Orléans, Joan became unstoppable. In just 3 months, she helped Charles VII's march to Reims, the traditional site of French coronation. And there in the Grand Cathedral, she stood beside him as he was crowned king. She had done the unthinkable, from dirt to throne room, from sheep herder to kingmaker. She was 17. No one had ever seen anything like it. And the world, especially the English, took notice. And then they betrayed her. Joan's power grew, and with it came enemies not just across the battlefield, but within her own ranks. French nobles didn't like a peasant girl giving orders. Church leaders whispered about her voices, her visions, her independence. She had become too powerful, too strange, too uncontrollable. In 1430, during a campaign to liberate more towns, Joan was captured by Burgundian allies of the English. Charles, the man she had crowned, did not ransom her. She was left behind by the very kingdom she saved. The trial that was never about truth. The English didn't just want her dead. They wanted her discredited. So they put her on trial for heresy. Not for killing. Not for treason. But for claiming God spoke to her, for wearing men's clothes, for hearing voices, for acting outside the role a woman was meant to play. She was interrogated for months, alone, without a lawyer, in Latin, a language she didn't speak. And yet she held her ground. She never recanted, even when threatened with torture, even when they promised her life in exchange for silence. Joan knew the truth. If I am not in God's grace, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me there. Burned but not broken. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in Rouen. She was 19 years old. As the flames consumed her, eyewitnesses say she didn't scream. She called out Jesus' name over and over until the smoke took her voice. Even the English executioner wept. Even her enemies whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was who she said she was. But fire doesn't kill faith. 2 decades later, Joan's trial was retried. She was declared innocent. Centuries after that, she was canonized as a saint. Not because she wore armor, but because she proved that belief is stronger than swords, that a teenage girl with nothing to lose is the most dangerous force on earth, and that some flames don't consume, they illuminate. Joan didn't want glory. She wanted obedience. She never asked to be famous. She never called herself a hero. She said over and over, I am not afraid. I was born to do this. She didn't fight for herself. She fought because something higher told her to. And whether that was God, destiny, or just something deep in her bones, it was real enough to change the course of history. Part 10. The Women Who Refused to Disappear. We've stood with Radagon in the dust. We've watched Tomyris bathe an empire in blood. We've heard Dihya's final war cry echo off the mountains. We've seen Joan of Arc rise from ashes. And now we step back. Not into a battlefield, but into a mirror. Because this last part, it's not just about them. It's about us, and what we choose to remember. History doesn't forget, it edits. Let's be honest. You probably didn't learn these stories in school. You might have heard of Joan of Arc through whispers of sainthood or vague images of a girl in armor. But Radagon, Tomyris, Dihya, Lagertha, they weren't forgotten because they were unimportant. They were forgotten because they were inconvenient, too bold, too powerful, too willing to fight back when the world told them to sit still. And so, history didn't erase them. It blurred them. This is what happens to women who don't die quietly. Some were called witches. Some were called mad. Some were made saints, but only after they were no longer a threat. The truth is, these women weren't erased because they failed. They were erased because they succeeded without permission. Because they proved that leadership doesn't need a beard. That conviction doesn't need a crown, that you don't need to be invited to save a kingdom. You just need to care enough to do it anyway. They didn't fit the story, so they became legends instead. You see, history loves to flatten things, to clean them up. Kings are brave, soldiers are men, women are symbols of peace, of fertility, of sacrifice. But these women, they refused to be symbols. They became storms. They weren't footnotes. They were chapters the scribes didn't know how to write. So they became legends instead. And legends, even when bent, twisted, or buried, survive. We don't remember them because they were perfect. We remember them because they were relentless. None of these women were flawless. They made hard calls, burned cities, defied kings. Some led armies. Some led rebellions. Some just stood their ground when the world told them to run. And that's the thread they all share. Not their crowns, not their bloodlines, not even their victories, but their refusal to stay silent, to shrink, to disappear. They weren't always right, but they were there, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. And here's the hardest truth. Some of them lost. Radagon was erased. Dihya was betrayed. Joan was burned. Lagertha was mythologized into memory. They didn't all get the endings they deserved. But they still won. Because every time you tell their stories, they rise again. Every time a girl reads their name, the silence loses ground. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a warning and a gift. To every empire that thinks it can't fall, remember Tomiris. To every ruler who underestimates a girl with a cause, remember Joan. To every system that says women must wait their turn, remember Rodigan who made her own. To every oppressor who believes fire will silence truth, remember Dihya. To every storyteller who asks, where were the women? They were right here, leading, fighting, dying, and still speaking through flame, through dust, through sagas no one could fully silence. So, what now? If you're watching this and thinking, these are just stories, you're missing the point. They're not stories. They're blueprints. They're proof that even in the darkest times when the world is run by fear and men with crowns, there's always someone, often a woman, who breaks the pattern. Who says no? Who says not yet? Who says I was born to do this? The next chapter isn't written yet. And maybe that's where you come in. Maybe the next Radagon isn't born in a palace, but in a city apartment. Maybe the next Joan is walking home from school right now, not knowing the war she'll one day face. Maybe the next Tamiris won't hold a sword, she'll hold a mic, or a camera, or a protest sign. And maybe the most dangerous thing you can be is a woman with a memory, because empires can burn books, but they can't burn what we pass down in fire. Tell the stories, say the names, speak them out loud in classrooms, on stages around kitchen tables, in quiet moments before sleep. Because the moment we stop, that's when they win. But if we keep going, they live, they lead. And the next girl who needs courage won't have to invent it. She'll remember it. Our story ends here. See you tomorrow evening. Good night. I love you.